Relationship with guys. That's something that's definitely in the back of everybody's mind, or maybe in the front of everybody's mind right now. I hope they'll be able to see that, like, we're not perfect people and we don't have all this stuff figured out, but maybe, like, by sharing some of our stories and experiences, they can learn from our mistakes.
Courtship, dating, relationship with guys, whatever you want to call it, is just to approach it with all purity.
Stay away even from romance novels, because a lot of times those just stir up desires in our heart as young ladies that cannot be righteously fulfilled.
Hey guys, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It's one of those days, it's one of those moments, it's one of those lifetimes. There has been an update in the courtroom in Fayetteville that doesn't involve Josh Duggar. And I know you guys are all waiting on pins and needles to find out whether or not Josh is going to accept a plea deal, and I don't have any news on that yet, but I do have some news for his sisters and where they're at in their lawsuit. Sisters have been in the court of law for years. In fact, since May 18th of 2017, Jessa, Jinger Joy, Anna, and Jill have all been in court fighting for their justice in the release of documents which contained information about an investigation that happened when they were younger, and it was revolved around what their brother did to them. Back in 2015, there was a Freedom of Information request that was made by In Touch, and they asked Fayetteville and I think Springdale Police Department for a report that revolved around Josh Duggar, and it was into a 2006 investigation into allegations that he had done things that were inappropriate. And the report was actually released through the FAA, through the Freedom of Information Act, and it was redacted, but unfortunately, obviously, interviews that were with minors, although redacted, were still able for people to see the responses, and some of them were able to cross-reference whose responses were for what, and it identified individuals that were minors at the time of this investigation. So they were fighting because they said it violated their privacy, and it also was it caused them pain and suffering, and they've been fighting for 4 years. A lot of the case has already been thrown out. A lot of the people that are on the lawsuit have been thrown out, and today is a day of reckoning. Up until today, there had been some movement. There had been some requests for a summary judgment. There was a dismissal where they dismissed the attorney from the state or the county of Washington. He was removed from the lawsuit. And so today, they are actually in a conference and they are working on a settlement. The details of the settlement, if they come to one, will not be made public, and the judge, Christy Comstock, actually released this on her. This was put into the docket earlier today, and it says, on Friday, October 15th, 2021, the parties to the above captioned matter will be participating in a settlement conference with the undersigned. It is paramount to note that the Arkansas law encourages state and local governments to use dispute resolution processes, Arkansas Code 16.7.201, that communications made during alternative dispute resolution proceedings, such as settlement conferences, are confidential and not subject to disclosure. The court simultaneously acknowledges that the liberal interpretation of this FOAI statute in allowing access to all government body meetings. Importantly, while the government defendants will be represented by legal counsel and other representatives during the court's settlement conference, neither the Springdale City Council members nor Washington County Quorum Court members will be in attendance or participate in any manner during the settlement conference. So there was some confusion because this does involve government workers, whether or not this would have to be considered a public disclosure. And she decides that it's not going to be a public disclosure because the city council members aren't going to be there. They're not going to have any court members there. So they said the court finds that the settlement conference will not be formal or informal, special or regular public meeting of either governmental entity in this context. They said even if the settlement conference subsequently is construed as a meeting subject to FOIA, it is the role of the federal courts to foster an atmosphere of open discussions among the parties, attorneys, and representatives so the litigation may be settled promptly and fairly so as to avoid the uncertainty and expenses and delay inherent in a trial. So they are trying to settle this case, and as a part of that, they're going to go into a settlement. Now, settlements can be very tedious, they can be arduous. You generally work with a judge and you have to mediate through your disagreements, and simply, you will discuss your issues, they discuss their issues, and the judge's role is to help you guys bridge a sort of place where both parties are satisfied. So they have thus far been unable to come to any sort of resolution. The government workers want this thrown out, and the girls are adamant that they do not want this to be thrown out. So today is going to be a meeting where they come together and try to find a common ground. It might mean that there's, no damages awarded. It might mean that there's some damages awarded. It might mean that they are held liable, they are not held liable, or it also could come to a situation where they acknowledge that what they did could have hurt them, but they are not acknowledging wrongdoing. Goal here is that everything can be settled without going to trial. Trials are expensive. Trials put everything on public record, and it's a way to keep this out of the public sphere without them hearing about all the things that it's done to the girls. So when you go to trial, if you're talking about pain and suffering, there could be documents that be released that talk about the mindset, the mental health, the different aspects that are going on with the girls since the release. So a benefit of doing a settlement conference in this case would be to protect the girls in many ways from further public disclosure of their trauma. So it says that the court must weigh the public's access to the settlement negotiations, keeping in mind that any settlement herein requires subsequent transparent governmental approval against the parties' right to have frank discussions. Few cases would ever be settled if the press or public were in attendance or privy to settlement proposals. Here, in the need for fair and efficient resolution of this 2017 case outweighs any slight interest the public may have in accessing settlement negotiations. So the court's power under this clause is basically going to make it so it's a closed order, it's a closed settlement with no public records, so we will not be able to find out how they've decided to settle this case if they decide to settle this case. And they're doing that because they say that it would not benefit anyone. And it sounds like everyone wants to put this to bed. So hopefully today will give a resolution for all parties. And it's probably not going to give them everything that they want, and it's not going to give the other people everything that they want. Hopefully they can come to a place in the middle. At the end of the day, I think for the girls, they need to find some sort of closure here in order to find, to be able to move on. I can't imagine the stress, the agony, and all of that of being stuck in litigation where every day you are forced to have to entertain one of the hardest times of your life with a document that was released publicly. And we're not here to say illegal or illegal any sort of way, but to them it was traumatic, and to having to relive that trauma every day for over 4 years, it would drain any person, no matter how strong they are. To have to stay within that pain for over 4 years, knowing that they have to do this if they want justice for what they believe happened to them, that's a lot. And sometimes the best thing is to settle, to find a way to move forward so you don't have to stay in that ugliness and that sadness and that pain. I think most people agree that what happened is horrible. I think people are divided on whether or not the government did anything wrong by releasing this. I think most people agree that what happened to them by Josh is terrible. And I think a lot of people, you can either blame the government or you can blame Jim, Bob, and Michelle for knowing that this was in their closets, knowing that this was in their past, and going on to national television and pretending to be perfect. Josh Duggar has his own problems. This investigation is public record. This investigation is actually a mitigating factor for his current situation. So Josh Duggar publicly admitting, acknowledging, and confessing to what he did to his sisters although he was never convicted, does play a role, or even though it was like almost 20 years ago, it'll still play a factor in sentencing if he goes to trial and with any plea deal that he takes, because it shows a pattern of behavior. So for 20 years, Josh has shown a pattern of being attracted to children, and this chapter for his sisters will probably close. We won't know the details, and hopefully they can move forward. And for Josh, perhaps a sentence of him going to prison, while not for the crimes he committed against them, but for what he's done to these other children, could be some form of justice to them, to know that he can't hurt anyone else for the years that he is incarcerated. What are your thoughts about a potential settlement and the thoughts about keeping it private? Do you think this is good for the girls, bad? Do you think that this was something they wanted to do, or do you think this was pushed by Jim Bob? What do you think about all of that? Tell me in the comments below. Bye, guys.